Now, it's a developments in science, particularly, first of all, it started in astronomy. It started technically, and I so appreciated my friend Dr. Kirk's message last Sunday. And I just wonder how many people see the wise men that came, and didn't say that there were three. First of all, I have to discuss it every year, and it's never paid no attention to it. And these were astrologers. Well, what were these Gentiles doing with this information, and the Jews didn't have it? See, all the development of that material was the Gentiles understood, and the people of God didn't understand. That's what was being claimed in that whole unit of Christmas. Everything. Well, anyway, that's not another thing, but it's the foundation. And I just tickled to death. If I had anything, I'd give it to you, Bob. But all I have is need, so you don't need any more of that. But anyway, it's over. It's still. They were astrologers. They were not. I mean, they were not scientific, but they seemed to have some accurate information. Now, where did they get this? I don't know, but it's testable. You know, they thought the Messiah ought to come to Jerusalem. You know all that story, but what does that have to do with science? Well, see, these men were pagan. They were Gentiles, knowing, and here the Jewish people didn't know a thing about it and didn't recognize it when he came. Well, that's purely revolution, whether you want to believe it or not. Revolutionary. Well, anyway, how do you get to the Enlightenment? The Aufklärung, we'd gone through in Western civilization transition periods. The first 5 centuries were expressed in the so-called creeds. Every one of those 5 creeds, 2 things about them till we get to 17th and 18th century, they're Eastern and they're all biblical. There's not one content in one statement of any of the 5 creeds. When I used to read, I haven't read them for 2 or 3 nights. You don't let me read them in bed anymore, so I can't read those. But anyway, every one of them are Eastern and every one of them is biblical. They're about biblical things. Well, then when you start getting creeds that transcend the biblical narrative, 6th century, 7th century, you're getting new developments in the West. Now, all these developments, science developed in the Christian West. I denied that science developed in Babylon or in Egypt or in Greece even. I denied that. Technically, science is understood by practicing scientists today, has its origin in the Christian West, technically in the 17th century. And you can identify the handful of people that are the origin of that development. Well, what does that have to do with the Christian worldview? What does it have to do with the Christian gospel? What does it have to do with Christ? He was the last to get the shaft. God and creation got the shaft first, then the prophets got the shaft, and then by the 19th century, Jesus got the shaft. That was the last person. Then all the Jesus debates, all those were just nonsensical debates over developments in science. This is only developed in the Western world, Western Christian world. So what do we find out when we come to the Enlightenment period? Is that up? I can't read it. My eyes are going. We get the controller.
Yeah, we're up to Hume, Kant's
biblical
criticism.
All right. And now Hume, the empiricist. Now notice the movement historically in the movement was from Italy to Germany, to Scandinavia, to Germany, to England, to France, to the to England, to the United States. The great philosophical minds, you could trace that in each of those categories, each of those countries. It started in another place, and Aristotle and Plato was the dominant philosopher in the whole discussion, unpacking Western philosophical consideration. So just to say, well, that's not my concern, I'm not in philosophy, I'd say then you miss the whole 1,500 years of discussion. Other than that, it's perfectly all right. And what is the Enlightenment? Well, we'd gone through the Renaissance. Now notice, in Christian civilization, you already know nothing that you don't know already. Renaissance is rebirth. Why do you need academic, intellectual rebirth in Christian civilization? Well, that's what drove them up the wall. They knew that something was wrong with Christian civilization, but they talked about Renaissance, rebirth. Well, that is a clue that something is desperately wrong. Then further, within 100-year development, you're on the way to the Enlightenment. Where is the Enlightenment? Aufklärung is a different way of seeing things. What was the way? The way was science. Technically, in the first place, it was astronomy, and it developed into geology and physics and chemistry and all the perimeters of science, and it developed the so-called Newtonian world machine. And Newton did not intend, as far as I can tell from the first critique or any of the materials in Kant, that he understood all that he was saying. And I don't want to psychoanalyze a dead person, because I think it's precarious to psychoanalyze a living person, let alone a dead one. So all these things are happening that you know in Christian civilization. They're not happening someplace else. They're not happening in another culture, in another world system or worldview system. They're happening in the Christian worldview system. So from Descartes, the mathematician, to Hume, to all these develops, to ultimately to Newton, the great creator of radical scientific revolution, Newtonian mechanics. In fact, not Samaritans, but the help me Jew, the largest growing church in the world, or a group of religious people.
Muslims.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. Muslims, all their physicists are still utilizing Newtonian physics. Now, that fits their fatalism and a que sera, but you see, that's their worldview. And these are the great minds in physics. They're not way past the next 200 years of development of science. They're still operating with Newtonian mechanics, which is, and you can't escape it. Now, it was not, I do not think it was Newton's intention, but it was the result of the so-called Newtonian world machine. Well, if the world's a machine, now man, human beings had escaped that implication. But within 100 years, man was included in that world machine, and you're into Darwin, and all the development of the human being is nothing more than the genetic aberration or modification in the gene pool. Well, if that's all a human being is, no wonder the human brain can be reduced to computer analog. That the mind and the brain are the same, and that reduces to a low-grade computer. If that's all it is, then human beings do not have biblical standing. I mean, that's I don't think you need to be a Harvard Phi Beta Kappa to figure that out. So man gets it, and then Marx comes along, and Darwin comes along, and Marx who was German, Jew, trained, taught in England, and he's revolutionary, whether you like it or not, know about it or not. He changed the world. Probably half of the world at this time are Marxian, as a matter of fact. Well, that's influence. Well, the point is that something you know, we're just having a revival meeting, then I'll kumbaya and we'll offer an invitation hymn. Freud says that three great minds have changed the Western world. That might be a slight oversimplification. He said Copernicus, and everybody, but he never mentioned some man. And I'm not playing games with him. He never mentioned Marx. But as a matter of fact, in the very century that he wrote his lectures, his 1,000-page lectures on psychoanalysis, this medical doctor, there was a psychoanalysis expert, or the father of psychoanalysis, but he was a doctor. So anyway, he did not include Marx. Well, if he'd have been aware of Marx's influence, that's just technical, useless jargon, but Marx does change the world. There's no discussion about that. Only the uninformed would question it or wish they'd never heard it. But 4 or 5 people have changed the world. Now we come all the way quickly so we can get back into the Enlightenment categories. I want to show you the categories that control the Enlightenment period. Now, why do you need enlightenment in a Christian world? Why do you need a renaissance in the Christian world? Now, that's the main thing that you already know everything else. That's the main thing I ask you to not forget. How and why did that happen in Christian, Western Christian civilization? I don't know anything more important that Christian education should address than that. There may be, but I'm unaware of it. But most people would say I'm unaware of most things. So that's their problem. I think they're wrong. But anyway, we come to this period that renewal is necessary within the Christian institutional structures. Up to this time, up to the time of the Reformation, all the reformers, as you know, were Roman Catholics. Luther was a Roman Catholic priest, had an earned doctorate. He was the first to be authorized by Rome to lecture in Romans. He wrote a commentary on Romans that's probably all right for freshmen, but not a technical commentary, but he changed the world. It's like Augustine's commentary on Romans, changed the world, but in a technical sense, not a marvelous, is not going to get a Harvard doctorate for it, but he changed the world. So what's in it that changed the world? What's in Luther's commentary? What's in Wesley's commentary? What's in the Roman epistle that changed the world? And none of them addressed the development of science. Not one of them. Not any of the great minds from the beginning of the 19th, 20th century, not any of the great minds addressed the technical advancements in science. But science was still progressing, so they were trying to address what they figure was the downfall of what they facetiously called conservative Christianity. I don't like that word because that means to conserve something. Well, I want to know what you're conserving and why. Or liberal, it means to set free from something, but from what and why. So I don't want to use these except to tell you that I don't want to use those words. And it's all about science, not about something else. Now, what are the assumptions of the Enlightenment? How do they impact Christian civilization? And all the things that are going on in the context of the development, technically, not of philosophy, not even of literature or music, but it was going on in the context of the physical sciences, as a matter of fact. So in that context, the heart of the Enlightenment is that you do not need God to examine or to explain the universe. Well, where'd that happen? That's not a new thought, but it's a new thought within Christian civilization. So so therefore, the only place there was left, that's where you start getting the euphemism like secularism. That's just a Latin word that means the only thing that's real is this world. Well, that's the polarization between grace and nature. You know all about that. Well, what happened to grace? Well, when you get rid of God, you get rid of grace. When you get rid of God, the creator of the universe, you also get rid of any possibility of sustaining the biblical doctrine of Christ. No question in my mind about that. So another thing in the development of the Enlightenment, besides the developments were along from scientific information and not from biblical studies, but it is also the context of the world developing what is negative biblical criticism. Any evaluation is criticism in a technical sense, but negative criticism was attacking the biblical paradigm, the biblical model of the creation of the universe, the God that spoke through the prophets and he stopped speaking. His final word is in the Word, the living Word, Jesus Christ. So all of education is about Jesus, is about the Christian faith, is about the ultimate outcome of being able to make sense to a world that has abandoned that image a long time ago.